Hello there, my lovely jewelry makers. I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this Astral Viking knit necklace. So this is actually part of a whole set that I made that's going to be matching bracelet and earrings, and they'll all be collected in a playlist that's going to be left in the description box below the video. And all the pieces will also be available for sale in my shop along with other jewelry kits and tutorials. But if you want to learn how you can make the necklace here, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we're going to need. Now all the wire that I'm using is a regular round silver coated copper wire, and the first gauge here is a 0.4mm. This is what we're going to use to make the Viking knit with. Then I have a 0.6mm which we're going to make our loops with, and finally a 0.3mm that we're going to use to attach the loops to the Viking knit with. Now the beads that we need are 2mm rounds, and the specific ones I'm using are faceted hematite gemstone rounds. Of course you can use whatever you prefer. I've then got some kumihimo ends to finish off the ends of the Viking knit, and they have these loops in them where we can attach our findings. So I'm using a lobster claw clasp and extender chain along with a few jump rings. Of course you can use whatever kind of clasp you prefer. And alongside the kumihimo ends I'm also using this E6000 glue that's going to attach them securely to the ends of the Viking knit. And then we're going to need to be able to make a Viking knit. So first of all, I'm using a Viking knit tool here that I've made myself. I do have a tutorial that shows how you can do that if you don't have the lacy daisy. So if you do have it, you can of course use that, but if you don't, you can easily make your own. I also recommend having an awl that'll help open up tight spaces where you need to get your wire through. Finally, we need a draw plate for once we've finished making the Viking knit. To make our loops with, I'm going to be using this coiling gizmo along with the 5mm rod, and to then turn our coils into the loops we need a steel block along with a jewelry hammer. And as for the pliers, I'm just going to have the basics, so of course some flush cutters so we can actually cut our wire, and then also my tweezers and nose pliers in case I need to manipulate any wire. Now you're going to be able to find this whole material and tool list along with useful links in the description box below the video. So once you have all your tools and materials ready, then let's get started. So to make the Viking knit, of course we need to grab our tool here. Like I said, this is just my homemade one. You can also use the Viking knit tool, and what I have is 6 loops all the way around that we're going to be working with, and this is just an 8mm crochet hook that I'm using for reference, and I'm going to be doing the double Viking knit. So we got the tool, and then I've also cut off a length of my wire, and just what you're comfortable working with. I like working with a wingspan. Then we need to attach the wire first of all, so I'm putting it through one of the loops but from back to front, in my case from left to right, and then we have a little tail there. I'm going to put my thumb on that, bring it downwards, and then bring the long end here over that and towards the right. So I'm going to be working in this direction. You can also do opposite, that's completely up to you. Now we're going to then go all the way around, grabbing onto all of the loops with our wire here, and basically make our first row of loops. So I'm going to jump to the next loop, go through that now from front to back and from right to left, because we've already attached it. And I'm just going to make sure that my wire is coming out over the top of itself, and then I'm going to pull it through all the way, and then I like to just put my thumb on the loops here so they kind of stay in place, because we want to have somewhat even spacing between the loops, and then pull it so we create another loop below the one that's coming from the tool itself. Grab the end of the wire, go through the next one, come out over itself and pull it through, and then again we want to pull this tight, so I'm just putting my thumb on it to keep the distance, and we're basically creating these loops in the loops in the tool, and in between the loops we have these little bridges. So I'm just going to go around and do this all the way until I'm back at the beginning, and now I'm back to where I made my first loop, and you can see I'm just missing that final bridge. Now what I'm going to do is make another row of loops, but this time I'm going to come behind the first loop that we made, so don't go through the tool but straight behind the loop, and then pull that all the way through again. Pull that tight, create a new loop which is now then going to sit underneath the first one and also behind it. And I've then also created the final bridge there, so it's basically closed up all the way around now. Grab the end again and then go behind the next loop, and we just want to now do this all the way around to the beginning again. And what we're going to then find as well is we're going to start to see, as I create these bridges, is going to be more underneath each other. So you can see I'm creating the second bridge now because we already had one above it previously. So just keep going like this again all the way to where we started out. Now again I'm back to the beginning, and we've pretty much now made 2 full rounds of regular Viking knit. This is now I'm going to start making the double Viking knit, because to create this final bridge to make it a complete round, what we're going to do is again go behind a loop, but instead of going behind the bottom loop that we just made in the previous round, I'm going to go up to the second loop from the bottom. In this case obviously that's the very first one that we made, but that is a basic principle. So I'm going to basically skip the bottom loop and then go up one, pull that and create that final bridge in the previous row. And this is now how we want to keep going. So move to the next one, I'm skipping the bottom loop and then going behind the next one up, pull it all the way through, create that next bridge. Now this is the third bridge, and basically now this is what we want to keep doing. So just keep working your way all the way around. And now again, I'm back to the beginning. So just to show you, it's the same principle. I'm going to move around to the next loop, and we need to go behind the second loop. So what I personally like to do is count the bridges. So I'm going to count 1, 2 from the bottom, and then go behind. Now this is a little tight because we do have that tail there. That's what I usually find. We then need to use the awl, which comes in handy for then putting in where you want the wire to go, and basically just opening up that tight space. You can see it comes a bit out on the other side. That should now have created enough of a gap so we can easily push the wire through. So remember, I'm counting 2 bridges from the bottom because that's how we make the double Viking knit. Come out on the other side, pull that tight, and then continue to the next one. Count from the bottom, 1, 2 bridges, and then go behind that loop right above the second bridge, and then pull it tight and create a new bridge on the previous section there. And you literally just want to continue like this. Now you will need to add in new wire along the way because this length of wire will only make so much Viking knit. So I do have a separate video where I go into detail on how to make basic Viking knit and also double and triple Viking knit. So if you need more detail, more tips, and also how to add a new wire, I recommend checking that out. I'm going to leave a link to them in the description box down below. It's a little mini series that I did on how to make Viking knit. Otherwise, we just want to keep going like this, making this double Viking knit with the 6 loops here for however long we need our knit to be. So I've now finished making the whole length of Viking knit here, and you can see it's coming off the rod. And the length of this is about 13 inches long. And this is for the whole necklace. Of course, you can make it longer or shorter depending what you prefer. That's up to you. Bearing in mind, it will get longer because we still need to draw this through the draw plate. But what we can do is remove it from the rod because we're done actually making the Viking knit now. So then what I'm going to do is just remove the little tool that we made. You just want to go in and cut the loops off. Now I'm cutting the loops in the tool itself, not the actual Viking knit, because we do need to use those. So just cut all the loops so I can then go in and remove the tool. And now what we're going to need to do is cut 3 lengths of scrap wire if you don't have some laying around, just 10 to 15 centimeters or so. And I'm just going to do it one at a time. And we basically need to put these through these loops at the end of the Viking knit, just through from one side straight across to the other, and then bring it to the middle of the wire, pull the 2 ends upwards, and then grab the next one, go through the next loops that are opposite each other, bring it to the middle and bring them straight up, and the last one through the remaining 2 opposite loops. And then just bring all the wires here coming straight out from the end, and then holding on to the Viking knit, I'm just going to twist them together so they're now more secure, and we can basically use these as a bit of a handle for pulling through the draw plate, which is what we're going to do now. So I'm going to grab my draw plate here, and then at the end with the handle that we just made, and I first of all like to find the hole in the draw plate that's about the same size as the actual knit itself. So that's the biggest one on this draw plate here for me, and it pulls through really easily. So I'm going to straight away step it down to the next size, and that also pulls through pretty easily. But we're then going to start to get it a bit tighter as we step it down one at a time. Now it's still pulling through pretty easily, but it is tighter. So I'm just going to pull it all the way through and basically keep doing this until we get it down to the size that we want. So I'm just stepping down one size at a time. And what I do like to do is, now that it's a little bit tighter, just pull it through the same size twice before I then move on. So keep pulling it through, and you're going to also then find it starts to kind of neaten up and look nicer, and also of course the diameter on this does become smaller, and therefore the length also gets longer as we go. So what I've ended up with is going through the size that's 6 millimeters in diameter, and that is where I'm going to stop because this is how I want my knit to look, and it's going to fit nicely with the design that we're going to do. Now what I'm just going to do is clean up the ends here so we can remove our little handle. Just cut it off, and if you need to cut any wire on the other end. So we have some clean ends to work with, and now what we can do is start attaching our loops. Now my final length here has ended up being 16 inches long after I've drawn it through the draw plate. So this is going to be the length of my necklace, obviously minus any class that we're going to add. You can always make it longer and shorter, that's completely up to you. So of course you can make a longer Viking knit or shorter if you want to, or you can also just cut the Viking knit down from this size. So that's completely up to you. Now to make our loops, we first of all need to make a coil. So I'm going to attach my coiling gizmo to my desk using the clamp, And then I'll add the rod into the corresponding hole. I'm going to attach the end of my 0.6mm wire around the handle so it stays in place, and then literally just start coiling the wire around the rod. Now you just want to make sure that your coils are nice and tight, so you can always push the rod against the tool so it tightens up the coils. And you also want to avoid any of the wire overlapping itself. So now I have my finished coil here, and I just filled up the whole rod because I'd rather have too much than too little. And you can always use the spare coils for something else. So what we're going to do now is take it off the rod. So just undo that initial wrap and slide it off, and this is then our coil. Now I just like to cut off this little excess wire end, and then now we need to start turning these coils into our loops. So first of all, I'm going to start from one end, and we need to basically flatten these out a little bit. So I'm going to push with my fingers in one direction. So I'm kind of pushing them instead of laying flat next to each other. I'm going to have them basically overlapping each other a bit and going towards one side, and just do that all the way along, just gently. We don't have to push too hard. It's just to make sure that they're all going to be facing in the same direction. And the reason that we're doing this is because I'm now going to bring in my steel block here and jewelry hammer, because we now need to start flattening them out. And having pushed them a bit to the side, that's going to ensure, like I said, that they're all going to be facing in the same direction. So I'm just going to start on one end, making sure that they're laying flat on the steel block, and then just gently start to hammer them. So I'm hammering them, but it's only very gently. So you don't need to put a lot of effort into this. So I'm just going to basically start flattening them more, and they're also then naturally going to get separated out more from each other. And just going to do this all the way along. And then once we reach the end, you can always just go over and do it again, just to make it a little bit flatter and even it out, and also help separate those coils, which are now kind of turning into the loops, more out from each other. And I can then remove the hammer and the steel block, because then I'm just going to go over to basically just using my hands. And you will probably also find that it looks a little bit funky. As you can see, mine wants to really curl up, but don't worry about that. Just start from one end again, and then I'm going to start to actually pull them apart with my hands. So just grabbing a bit at a time, hold on to the loops and start pulling them apart a little bit. And then also I'm flattening them out further with my fingers, and I'm going to pull them apart until we have the loops more prevalent and also basically laying next to each other, kind of meeting up side by side. So you just pull them apart until you're happy with them, and also flatten them down, and then you move on to the next little section and do the same. Pull them apart gently. I like to do kind of a bit at a time, and also this helps straighten it out so we don't have that weird curl in it as we go through the whole length. And this is then what it looks like when I've finished, and we've ended up with a pretty long length of these loops here. So like I said, you might not need them all for this design, but you can of course either make more or use them for different things. Now what I recommend that you do is, if you have a long length of your loops, then you might just want to kind of measure against the length of your Viking knit here that your necklace is going to be, and just cut it down so we have a decent length to work with, because there's no point in having a much longer length than we need. It's just going to kind of get a little bit complicated and probably get tangled up. So to start attaching our pieces together, we need to cut a length of a 0.3mm of about 2.5 meters. And then I'm grabbing the loops here, and on one end what I'm going to do is actually undo the very first loop. So just roll it in the opposite direction, so we're kind of straightening out the wire. It doesn't have to be completely straight, just so we don't have the loop in place there. So we now have the final loop, and then a short length of wire here. Then I'm going to take my Tweezernose pliers, and just after where the loop is, place my pliers, and then I want to bend this short length just straight downwards at about a 90-degree angle like that. Now I'm then going to go in and cut it shorter, so we're just left with a few millimeters there right after the bend, because what's going to happen is that when I bring in my Viking knit, this little bend and end of wire is going to basically slot into the Viking knit and help it be fastened in place. But obviously we need to be able to also attach them, so that is where our length of 0.3mm wire comes in. So first of all, we just need to attach it. So I'm just going to take the end of the wire, and I want to attach it on one end of the Viking knit. It doesn't matter where you start, but what I'm going to do is basically go through straight from one side to the other, and then I'm just pulling through a short length here that I'm then going to use to go back and forth through a few times. So you just want to make sure you step a little bit away from where the wire is coming out, so it's not going to pull back through, and go back and forth a few times, securing this wire in place so we can start using it to attach our loops. And once the wire is now attached securely, you can just finish off the end. Now if you want to, you can also leave that, but what I'm just going to do is bring it around a single wire in the knit here. I'm just doing it now so it doesn't get in the way when we're going to be moving on and attaching the loops. So like I said, just wrap it around a single wire a few times in the same place. So I've just done it 3 to 4 times or something, and don't worry about how it looks because this is going to get hidden inside of our kumihimo ends. And then just cut the excess off and just make sure to push that little end within all the Viking knit here so it blends in with all the other wires. So now we have our wire attached, so we can now bring back in our loops, and I already prepared that end. So where my wire is coming out from here, I'm gonna push that little end on the loops in where my 0.3mm basically is coming out from. So just push it in between the wires in the Viking knit, and then I'm gonna wrap this 0.3mm around that end of wire. Now I'm wrapping it around right before the very first loop, but on the wire that's going straight across before the actual bend, and it's going to be a little bit fiddly here in the beginning. So just hold on to it the best you can and wrap it a few times, basically until we get up next to the loop. And then instead of bringing it around and doing another wrap, what I'm going to do is get to the end of the wire, and then on the back here I'm going to then take it right where that last wrap is and bring it through the Viking knit straight through from this side to the opposite side. So it's coming out straight across from it and just coming through the gaps in the Viking knit. And then I'm literally just going to be pulling this all the way through nice and gently so we don't get any kinks. And then as it's pulling tight here, you can see it's going to basically finish off that last wrap. Now we of course need to get a wire back on the other side again so we can continue wrapping around the loops. So I'm going to take the end again, and then you just want to make sure where the wire is coming out from that you just go a little bit away from that, so you don't just pull the wire straight through the same place that we went through before, but then make sure it comes out in the next place that we need to wrap. So in my case here, that's going to be between the first and the second loop. So I'm making sure the wire comes out in between those two, so it's going to be in the perfect position for the next few wraps. So make sure to pull that nice and tight so we don't get any loose wire anywhere. Now I'm going to bring it down between those two loops that I'm going to wrap between, and then again bring it around that wire that's basically connecting the two loops. And I just want to wrap around a few times just like we did right at the beginning, and make sure your wraps are as nice and tight as possible, and basically just do however many wraps you need to until you reach that next loop. So we basically don't have any more space to wrap. So I'm doing my final wrap here, but instead of just wrapping it around one more time like we've been doing, I'm going to again get to the end of the wire, and then on the back here I want to go down through the Viking knit right where my wraps end, from this side straight through to the opposite side, and then just pull that all the way through, making sure we don't get any kinks. So just undo any that might be forming, and then as we pull this tight, that's going to basically finish off the final wrap on that little section. And we're now on the inside again, you could call it, which means I need to get back to the end, move away from where the wire is coming out from a little bit, bring the wire straight through the Viking knit to the opposite side again, and make sure it comes out where I need to make my next two wraps. So that's going to be between my second and third loop, and you just want to keep moving along like this, one loop at a time, and then your loops are going to get attached nicely and securely to one side of your Viking knit. So now I made my way all the way around here, and the loops are nice and securely attached. They're not going to come off. Now what we just need to do is finish off this end as well, and I'm basically going to finish it off the same way that I started it out. Now of course we just need to get rid of the excess loops here. So the last wrap that I did is close to the end of the Viking knit, but we just have a little bit of space just like we did on the other end there when we started out. So what I want to do is just cut off the excess, but just leave one loop after where my last wrap is. So cut that off and then just put them out of the way. And then I'm going to take my tweezer nose, and just like the other end, I just want to undo this very last loop just so we get a bit of length here on the wire that we can then use to again tuck into the actual Viking knit. So I'm going to cut this down so I just have a short little length after the wrap like that, because obviously right now the loops are attached, so we're not starting out with it, we're now finishing it off. Then I'm going to grab that very end and just lift it up a little bit and then bend it so the end of the wire goes into the Viking knit, and then we can just kind of push it in all the way, and the end of the wire there it's nicely tucked out of the way and it's not going to catch or scratch on anything. Now we also just need to finish off the weaving length here. So all I'm going to do is go back and forth a few times just to make sure it's nice and secure. So pull that nice and tight, and then I just want to find somewhere that I can basically wrap this around a single wire in the Viking knit there. So if you have a little loop somewhere, wrap it around that same place a few times so we make a few coils. Then we can cut off the excess and just squeeze the end also in among all the Viking knit so it goes out of the way. And then we have our Viking knit with the loops now attached. So the next thing we need to do is now attach our beads. For that we need to cut another length of the 0.3 mil, and this is about 1.5 meters long. And what you want to do is just take the length, start on one end, and again take your Viking knit here, and you first of all just want to attach it in the same way that I showed you when we attached the loops, and we're just starting on one end again, and you want to make sure the end we're going to be working with is going to be coming out right where the loops are starting as well. So now I got the length of wire attached here and it's ready for the beads, so I'm going to make sure to bring some of those in so I have them handy for when I need them. And before I move any further, I'm going to add my very first bead. So just add it onto the end of your wire and then let it drop all the way down. And then where we're going to be placing these beads is basically right on top of that connection point between the loops and the Viking knit. So I'm just going to be using the little gaps that we have in between those loops and the Viking knit. So I'm just going to bring the end of the wire through here from the front to the back, and I'm also only adding the beads to one side, so obviously that's going to end up being the front of the necklace. So I'm pulling this all the way through, and then it's going to make sure the bead is going to end up sitting sideways there, and then we need to come around and I'm just going to loop through the wire itself to help make sure the beads are going to stay in place, and then pull that nice and tight. And I now have the wire in position for the next bead, so just add that onto the end of the wire, let it drop all the way down, and then just find a place where we can bring the wire through. I'm now just going to come down between the two loops there and then come through from the back to the front. So again we can get in position to add the next bead. So it's really just wherever you find gaps between that connection point. You can see that's now my second bead, and they're going to be on there nice and securely. And I have the wire ready and in position for the next bead. Let it drop down and then go through a gap, have the wire come out of the back, and then just pull it tight so the bead is going to end up sitting sideways next to the other ones. And you basically just want to keep going like this all the way along, going between those little gaps there, adding one bead at a time, all the way around to the other end as well. So I now made it all the way around to the other end here with the beads. Then I have a little tail left, and I'm just going to go back and forth through the Viking knit again a couple of times. Once we've done that a few times, I'm just going to find somewhere where I can wrap my wire around a single wire in the Viking knit a few times in the same place here, and then I'm going to just cut off the excess and then just push in that little end. So now the main part of the necklace is finished, and what we just got to do is finish off the ends here so we can of course attach a clasp and actually use it. And this is where kumihimo ends come in, and we also just need to grab our glue so we can get a nice secure bond. Then I'm just going to take a toothpick and use as an application tool, get a little bit of glue onto that, and then just basically get it inside of the cord end here. Now you don't need to fill it completely because the end of the Viking knit is going to go inside and the excess glue is just going to come spilling out, but just put a decent amount and make sure to cover the inside walls. And then I always like to take what I've got left on my toothpick, or add a bit more if you need to, and just put it on the end of the actual Viking knit, and also just get it right in there and in between all the wires, just so that when we put the two pieces together and the glue dries, they're going to adhere nicely and create a really strong bond. And then grab that kumihimo end with the glue in and just put it onto the end of the Viking knit, and then you just need to let it sit there and dry, and then we have the loop on the kumihimo end where we can attach our findings. And of course you just want to repeat the same on the other end as well. And then you just attach your findings and your necklace is finished and ready to wear. So this is a part of a whole set of jewelry that I made that all match nicely together, and there's going to be a whole playlist with all of them in there, so I'm going to leave a link to that in the description box down below so you can easily find them all. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed learning how to make this necklace. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.